Okay, the new and all that nonsense, I suppose. We might as well get that out of the way.
Good morning, Vietnam!
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I feel the need for speed.
Roads? When we're going, we don't need roads.
Snakes. Why'd it have to be snakes?
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Batman.
Right. Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. Today, given the fact that we are covering a couple of Scottish films, it's a good time to remember that we are now in an early spring season. You hear the first rustlings of the young haggis in the underground as they come to fruition after a hard winter. You get the smell of the first tumshi of the year in the fields. You see in amazement as people are starting to put their washing actually out on the line, and you see what pants they got for their Christmas. And as always, when we come into these nice warm months in the Scottish winterette, I suppose you would call it more than anything else, there's the hint of a DFS sale on the horizon. So, in that light, I would like to welcome back wee Mary to the pod. How the hell are you doing, hen?
And can we please do the whole pod in these accents? Just like, oh, this is terrible. Talking about two Scottish films.
Oh, I'm awful worried.
Yes, Al Gagbra and all that. Looking forward to chatting about these.
So today we are talking about two films from our 1995 marathon. Now, I was the one that actually came up with the idea for this marathon, so I take full responsibility for the films that were actually picked here. And given the fact that when I was sitting watching the first and the second of these, I was thinking, what the hell have I done here? This is unbelievable. What have I let myself in for? Anyway, we are talking historical Scottish epics on this show. First off, we are going to be talking about Rob Roy, and then later on we will be countering that with the other epic of the year, Braveheart. But as I say, first film today is Rob Roy.
Liam Neeson.
I have been wronged by your lordship.
Hang him from the bridge.
Jessica Lange.
Though I love his honour, it is but a shadow to the love I bear him.
John Hurt.
You're damned, McGregor. Damned to hell.
Tim Roth.
I want McGregor!
And Eric Stoltz.
Stay back.
You'll never know the meaning of courage.
Throw down that, and I'll spare you.
All but one. Till you know the story
Fine you are to me.
And you to me.
of Rob Roy.
It's a historical drama, apparently. It stars Liam Neeson, Jessica Lange, John Hurt, Tim Roth, Eric Stoltz, and token Scotsman Brian Cox.
I was going to say, when are you going to get to the Scottish cast?
It's set in the 70s. It's around about 1713. The film is set, and it's a fictionalized account of the later life of Rob Roy McGregor. He works for a lowland, is it a marquis, I think it is, or whatever, one of these made-up titles, basically. He works for him looking after his cattle and finding cattle that has been stolen, but he has ambitions to go beyond that in order to help provide for his clan, the clan McGregor,
Yes.
as you wish. And to that end, he borrows £1,000, which is 1,000 Scottish pounds in this case, which
Yes, which are worth nothing compared to real money.
It's about a quarter of the value of English pounds apparently at the time. And now I would like to have seen him try to use it in a pub in London. That just wouldn't have happened. So he borrows this £1,000 from the Marquis of Montrose to basically buy and sell cattle, buy it cheaply in Elgin, drive it down to the north of England and sell it, making a profit in order to help his family and his clan. Things go awry when he is betrayed because he's told he would get a promissory note for the £1,000, and instead he is given the coinage, and that coinage is then stolen in there's a bit of a chase, but we'll talk about the chase later.
Yeah.
And from then he is indebted to the Marquis, and various things go on from there in order for him to try and pay off the debt. The debt can be paid in blood, or the Marquis actually wants him to denounce another Marquis from somewhere else who is a Jacobite, and basically to declare himself for the crown and for England, which of course is going to cause Big Liam some problems because he's fully tartaned up at this point. So I know for a fact you have never seen this film. I can hold my hands up and say I have never seen it either. So what were your expectations of this once I said we would do this?
I guess going into it, because Braveheart was out in the same year, and we're obviously talking about that as well, I guess my expectations were it would be something along those lines. I don't particularly know the story of Rob Roy other than that he was like an outlaw and a cattle farmer. But to be quite honest, I got about 15 minutes into this and just knew this was not going to be the film for me. But being the noble podcaster that I am, I battled my way through to the end. There are some good points about it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. There's a particular performance that I think is actually quite fantastic in this film. But yes, it definitely a different vibe to Braveheart. I feel like it feels like there's less at stake because it's not the future of the nation, and also definitely a lot more vulgar than I anticipated. Maybe.
I will get on to the vulgarity count in a short while. Yes, I shall mention that. For myself, as I say, I'd never seen it. I had never really wanted to see it based on the fact that other people had told me that it wasn't a particularly brilliant film. So it seemed like a nice pairing for what we're doing today. And I thought, yes, I'll give it a go. And when I actually went in and looked at it on IMDb, it's pretty well received.
Yeah, that's what I was shocked at as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who say it's a very good film. But again, I think we'll be able to dissect why that is in a short while. But I had little expectations of the film, and the little expectations were just about met in watching this. It wasn't an enjoyable watch for me, and it was about 2 hours and 20 minutes long in terms of the watch as well, so it wasn't great. This film opens in the Highlands, where I must say this film was entirely shot in Scotland.
Which it does have going for it. Yeah, I will give it that. Yeah.
Yep. So the opening of it is McGregor and some of his compatriots chasing down cattle rustlers. So what did you think of that as an opening to a film?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think what's apparent straight away is the accent salad. Like, this is definitely not a film where anyone is committing to anything that sounds remotely Scottish, which is a bit of a struggle. But I like the fact that, I suppose you get the long hair, the red hair, the tartans, the sort of dirty faces. And it does kind of, as I say, it places you really well because you can tell you're actually in Scotland. So that was good. But yes, it was an unusual opening in the sense that I was kind of expecting there's like this sort of vaguely Celtic sounding score over the top of it as well, which again, when you look at Braveheart's score, just doesn't even come anywhere near. But for me, I guess the thing is that, and what I felt about this the whole way through this film, and that includes the score actually, is this felt like what Americans think Scotland looks like, sounds like, feels like, all that sort of thing. Whereas Braveheart, unbelievably, despite the fact that it was, written by an American and starring an Australian, definitely feels more authentically Scottish. Don't ask me how. But yeah, I think it kind of sets its stall out from the offset is it's going to be a bit cheeky, a bit swaggery, and just don't expect anyone that sounds like they come from Elgin, like, just don't expect that here. Yeah.
I got the impression that the opening was there to establish Neeson in the role of Rob Roy as a man who thinks before taking action, because obviously they catch up with the cattle rustlers, and instead of attacking them at night and getting the cattle back and killing them all, he says, no, I'll go and talk to them in the morning.
Yeah.
Because I know one of them. And it turns out he knows one of them because he played games with him when he was in Edinburgh or something, like when he was younger.
And of course, we all know each other in Scotland, so that makes complete sense.
Yeah, well, that is something that you do get sometimes from people when you're, especially speaking to Americans. So you must know Mrs. Stewart from Kirkcaldy. Yes, aye.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I mean,
so-
it was an interesting sequence in the sense that you got the sense that he, as you say, maybe was a wee bit more strategic than the rest of his group who just wanted to go in and kick arse, whereas he was obviously like, no, we're going to sit, we're going to wait, we're going to bide our time. But I don't think that's a thought that necessarily carries through the rest of the film.
No, it doesn't really. It tries to in some of the scenes that you see him in, because he has a way about him in terms of sort of handling situations, but it's not used to great effect, I don't think, throughout it. So the establishment of him is interesting because it's setting out this is what he's going to be like for the rest of the film. This is, and then it doesn't. It gets derailed from that several times through for various reasons. Now, we've obviously touched on him. Big Liam, authentic Scottish accent, long hair, bit of a beard.
You know what?
He
He looks great in this, and I have to say, he looks enormous. Like, he is towering over other cast members who I also assume are quite tall, like Brian Cox and Tim Roth, who I assume are quite tall men. And he is enormous over the top of them. So I feel like it really plays into the myth of Rob Roy in the sense of his stature. And obviously, the cattle ranchers or the sort of ordinary Scots are dressed in this sort of sea of brown tartan, like no one's in colour really. It's all these kind of browns and earthy tones, and he is in them as well. And obviously, he has the lovely long hair as well. I am a sucker for a man with long hair, and that obviously contrasts with the sort of dandy look that the marquises and obviously the lords and all that they go for. I mean, Tim Roth, they must have used all of the brocade in the UK to actually get him into costume, but. It's disappointing. I mean, he is from Northern Ireland. It's less than 20 minutes, in a flight across the water. And I often think sometimes actually when you hear Northern Irish people speak that you can hear traces of let's call it a Glasgow accent. I think it sounds really similar. So I was really shocked that his accent was so poor. I'm not saying he has to sound like he comes from Elgin, because that is difficult. Even if you are Scottish, like the different Scottish accents, especially the further up you go, are difficult to get right. But I thought he'd even tried to sound like Glaswegian, and he didn't. It was a bit of the Sean Connery school of accents, wasn't it? It was not very good.
It was, yes. He is a very good actor. I enjoy watching him and everything. And when I was sitting watching this film, I was explaining to my son about the sort of trajectory of his career. Now, at this point in his career, he's still doing the serious acting stuff.
Yeah.
This is sort of pre-Star Wars and pre-Taken and everything like that. So he was involved in a lot of sort of heavy dramas and everything like that. He was regarded as more of a character actor, if you like, when men do these sort of roles. And here, it's just... I just don't understand this role at all. I can understand why he took it, because it's a lead man role and the film is all centered around his character, but I just don't get the sort of choices that were made here. A lot of them, I think, is down to the director rather than Neeson himself. I think he tries his best, but the accent does let him down very, very badly.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like, I think that this is the story of Rob Roy, I don't feel like we actually got under the skin of the man, which I think is probably why the character struggles and maybe why Neeson struggled to sort of bring this character to life, because there's moments where he's obviously at home with his wife, Mary, said in the worst accent possible. And you get a sense of who he is at home. And then there's like moments where he's with his clan and moments where he's sort of going toe to toe with the sort of landed gentry. But I never felt like you actually go under the skin of like... And I know that a lot of the Rob Roy story is mythical, but I never felt like you really got under the skin of that here, which is perhaps part of the problem.
Yes, I think there is not a lot of information or reliable information out there with regards to Rob Roy. There are fragments which people have created myths around, and this film, although it shares some of the same characteristics as the Walter Scott novel, it doesn't take any of the sort of story beats from it at all. It's just entirely made up. So I think it is more fiction than fact in this case.
Which, in fairness,
can
is pretty
understand,
much
yes.
the case with Braveheart as well, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But given that this is a film actually called after, the character, I just was a wee bit disappointed in how that was fleshed out.
Yeah, definitely, yes. So we have touched on some of the supporting cast already, just mentioned them briefly. Like I said at the top of the programme who was actually involved. So let's start with a good performance here. And the only performance from the whole ensemble that was actually recognised in any sort of award capacity. Talking about the role of Cunningham, the foppish dandy with the flashing blade, shall we say, who spends his time either drinking and dancing and doing other things, which may not involve standing up or lying down, and fighting as well. This character is played by Tim Roth in what was regarded as his biggest role to date at that point. What do you think about him in this?
Oh, he is by far and away the best thing about this. I love the way he was introduced because he's all sort of like powdered wig and over the top hand gestures and curtsies and all the rest of it. So you kind of think he's going to be along the lines of Longshank's son in Braveheart, that sort of effeminate, useless character that, is never going to ascend to any sort of real power. But he is a bastard in this. He is scheming, he is conniving, he sexually assaults basically whoever he can get his hands on, and he is a master with the blade, as and that's why I think the ending of this film actually works quite well, because it's set up from the very offset that his character is absolutely brilliant at sword fighting. So I really loved his performance in this, because there was a performance element to it when he's in court and he's being his sort of over-the-top, genteel English dandy, and then there's who he really is, which is just a nasty piece of work. So I really love him in this, and it's funny because when we went to see Tornado, which was the opening gala of the Glasgow Film Festival, there was a line of men all in identical black coats walking across the screen, and I nudged Chris and I was like, that one just to the right is Tim Roth, you can tell by the swagger. And he has the swagger in this as well. Like, there's just something about the way that man carries himself. He just oozes like this totally like defiant kind of energy, and he definitely brings that to the character. And yeah, as I say, he is a brilliant villain in the sense that he's very easy to hate, which is what you want in this. And actually, as I've said, by far and away the best thing about this film, because he's very, very captivating to watch on screen, because he's so dangerous, you don't quite know what he's going to do next.
Yeah, I would kind of agree with that. I was not drawn to him early on in the film. I thought it was fitting in quite nicely with some of the other supporting performances. But then, yeah, you're right. It did start to kind of grow on me, and he was there to be hated, and he did it very, very well. He didn't care about what people thought of him at all, which is quite unusual, because with obviously like landed gentry and noblemen and all that, it's all about the perception about how the people love them and their people support them and all this kind of thing. But he doesn't care at all, because he comes from dubious parentage, so that's him sort of disadvantaged to begin with, and he's kind of used that in order to sort of fuel his hatred of pretty much everybody else, and makes up his mind about what he's going to do to people, no matter who they are. So yeah, I thought that was quite nice. There was a hint there that he was actually the bastard son of the Marquis as well. I don't know if that really, it wasn't like totally explained in the film. There's a couple of hints towards it, but I don't know. Did you kind of get something from that as well?
Yeah, I definitely did. There was a couple of lines where it just sort of insinuated that, because he talks about him being like in his charge and things like that, and I just thought, oh, I wonder if that's actually, you've been a naughty boy and this is who you've produced, because I did think that definitely at a couple of moments. And actually, like, a couple of their sort of physical tics or whatever were kind of similar as well, and obviously they were dressed kind of, and I thought maybe that was to sort of plant that seed, and if that was, it might have been nice to explore that a little bit more. But again, I feel like for a long film, there's a lot of things we got sort of short shrift on.
Yeah. I mean, what is it with English in the historical dramas that make them some sort of sexual deviance? I don't quite get the link. I suppose it's a power thing more than anything else, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a way of putting people down, but it was very noticeable in the two films that we saw.
Yeah,
today.
and I think so. Tim Roth obviously sexually assaults Rob Roy's wife. Spoilers, and that scene is quite horrific. But again, I don't know. I feel like there's something. Maybe it's to paint the Scots as like, you know, this obviously like very oppressed people, but I don't like when films use that as a sort of like a rape revenge like plot point. Now, obviously, Mary tries to hide it from Rob Roy for long enough, but definitely in Braveheart, as we'll come on to, that whole sequence that obviously ends up in Murren's death sets up like history in motion, as it were.
Yes.
Whereas in this film, Mary obviously tries to keep it secret, but then they insinuate that basically she ends up the duff by him. So it's very confusing. I think it's obviously to show who he is as a character, and he is disgusting. So of course he ends up sexually assaulting people, but I almost kind of don't like it as a sort of spurring point, as it were, for plot, which it definitely is in Braveheart.
Well, Tim Roth was actually quite concerned about his performance because he thought it was far too eccentric for the film.
Really?
And he thought he was going to get booted off the film because of it, because it was just too far out there. And he was reassured, no, just keep doing what you're doing. This is exactly what this film needs. It needs this type of villainous character here. So obviously we mentioned the good. Let's mention the bad.
There's so much of it, though.
Let's start with Jessica Lange as Mary, your namesake.
The accent is like, God love her, she's American, right? So I understand that some points she sounded like she came from Dundee. Some points it was just like that sort of pan-Scottish accent that other people have. But then there was a point where she was in a scene with Cunningham, and she says, in a very broad Scottish accent, something like, I'm going to wish that my husband sees you dead. And then she slips into Southern Gothic, and she's like, and then I will think of you no more. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And I don't know if it's because there's not a lot of Scottish people in this cast. There's like, as I say, Brian Cox, Brian McCarty, who I think is excellent in it, and, you know, smaller parts for like David Heyman and Gilly Gilchrist and things like that. I don't know if there wasn't enough Scottish people around to go, that's not what that line would sound like, or that's not how that word should sound, because everyone is just off doing their own thing accent-wise, but hers is particularly noticeable because it slips basically mid-sentence more often than not. Don't get me wrong, I actually think that the chemistry between her and Liam Neeson is very palpable. Like you feel like they are two people who are very much in love with each other and obviously can't take their hands off each other. I think they actually have sex like 2 times within 10 minutes when you first meet them together. So they're obviously very amorous and in love, but her accent is so distracting. And especially when it's supposed to be these big dramatic scenes where like her house is being burned to the ground with her in it, or she's being, you know, assaulted or whatever, but all you can hear is this mishmash of not Scottish. Basically, not even tied to a particular geographical area of Scotland, just not sounding Scottish at all.
I would struggle to place where it came. Obviously, you were able to discern a wee bit of an East Coast Dundee accent. I had no idea where that accent was coming from. I just thought, this is awful. It just does not work at all for me. And I can understand why she's in the film, because
she's a name.
She's a name. She's a big actress. It's a studio film. American studio films don't care about making sure that any sort of accent or delivery is authentic. You see it all the time when they have French, German, whatever, you know, it's a standard. And I'm sure people who are reviewing films that are set in those countries as well, done by American or non-Scottish actors, would have the same complaints that we're having. It's just because we're used to the accent and we know what it should sound like, and the fact that it's so far away from what it should sound like. It's not even close. Like you say, they haven't it's a Dick Van Dykeism, isn't it? They've just said,
Oh, it is. Yeah.
I'm going to do a Scottish accent here. Scotland isn't that big, so they'll all sound the same anyway. So yeah, and
Yeah.
yes, it's really quite. I thought she was terrible in this film. I didn't. I even thought
Yeah.
that was awful. And now a lot of that you can put down to the words that they have to actually say and the way.
Yeah, and this is the thing.
It's set up. They're
I
not
think
bad
when the
actors.
accent, no, I think when the accent's a struggle, though, it makes everything else look bad because,
Mhm.
and I guess like we're in the sort of unfair position as it were to listen to this and know with our ears like what that person should sound like. None of these people obviously sound like the region that they're supposed to come from, rather, which is the same case in Braveheart, but somehow gets away with it a wee bit better. But Jessica Lange in this for me is so poor because like I can feel the struggle with the delivery with every line that she says, and therefore her face and her body is not emoting the way it should be because it's gearing itself up to make sure that it's pronouncing the word out or now the way that it should sound. And so I think that takes away from the rest of her performance because you can actually see her struggling with the dialect more than anything.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely, yes. It didn't come across particularly well, and I thought it really dragged the whole film down because of that. Now, the way that this film is set up, you have your opening salvo that we spoke about, and then you get his family life, and it establishes all that. So it establishes all the stakes. What did you think of the pacing of it? Did you think that kind of worked, or?
Oh, I've really struggled with this film. And I think, and again, and I hate to compare it to Braveheart, but that is kind of what we're doing here. But I think because the stakes didn't feel that high here, like, yes, obviously he was going to be potentially displaced and lose his croft. And I understand that. So for him, his whole world was about to come crashing down. But I think maybe because it wasn't like the fate of the nation resting on his shoulders, I just maybe wasn't as emotionally bought in. And the family scenes were fine, apart from the fact that he basically just wanted to fuck his wife all the time. Like that was basically the family life that we got to see, is that he was just absolutely gagging for it all the time. There's the scene where he like emerges from the loch, obviously doing Daniel Craig long before Daniel Craig ever did that. And he just goes straight into bed and obviously wants to. Mary doesn't actually get to say anything before he starts having sex with her. Like it's just a weird family dynamic. They've got the two boys. He's got a sort of circle of like friends or clan that he's kind of seems to be in charge of or whatever. But I really struggled with the pacing in this, and I felt like it suffered from a little bit of like what I would call like back and forwardism. Like we were going here, this happened, then we went back to the original place and something else happened. So then that took us to somewhere else where something else happened. And it was just like it was going through the motions of getting these plot points out without ever actually drawing you in emotionally. Like besides the accents, like I just never felt for these characters the way that I thought I might have.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because the way that it flipped wasn't particularly well done. You would have the initial scene where he was negotiating the return of the cattle without killing everybody. So only kills the one guy. And then it goes back to his home life, and then he's away again. He's in the... Oh, sorry, there's the introduction of Cunningham and all the sort of the higher-ups, and you see the Scottish guy in that, who's the swordsman who thinks he's better than everybody else, and he gets bested quite easily by Cunningham. And then you're back with Liam, and he's on the stones that make him hard. Which I thought, okay, thank you. Yep. It makes men hard and it makes women fertile. Okay, right. Thank you very much, Jessica.
Yes, that was a little bit of Scottish landscape history that I was not aware of. So that was useful knowledge, I suppose.
I think it was too disjointed in that respect because there was never any sort of pacing to it. It was going back and forward, and there was like these, and the touching on the way that it was shot, like it was all kind of like glossy and nice when they were like in the croft and up in the hills and all this sort of stuff, and you're thinking doesn't really do a service to what the film's trying to get across in terms of its story. But no, I thought it was pretty poorly done in that respect. Now, a wee interesting note from this: Roger Deakins, famed cinematographer, was the original cinematographer for this film, and he was fired Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. Michael Keaton-Jones fired him from the film. He had some sort of disagreement over it. And because of that, Brian Cox doesn't like this film because of the way that they were treated. People were treated on it. It's just,
thing.
yeah, it's not good at all, I don't think.
I
But
wonder what that film, if obviously Dakins had stayed employed, I wonder what that film would have looked like. Because to me, this, as you say, there's a gloss to it that's very American, and you do wonder what
Yeah.
Dakins was wanting to do that was maybe at odds with the studio's desires for how this film should look.
Yeah, I think, judging by the end product, they were looking for this almost like a historical drama with lots of romance and nice scenery in it, and it's really not what the story is or should be, I don't think. So a lot of that was down to the direction. Do you think that there was a lot of director's choices in this that didn't work or did work?
Yeah, no, it definitely, for me, I struggle with it because it felt like a series of vignettes as opposed to a coherent film. There's a lot of like sweeping scenery shots, which fine, fair enough. Let's celebrate Scotland. It is a beautiful country, but it just didn't. There was a couple of shots that I thought were quite nice. Like I do like the scene where Rob Roy walks into the bar and it is that kind of saloon moment, and he's shot slightly from below. So again, it just really emphasizes how bloody massive Liam Neeson is, and you've got everybody turning around, and that was like a real moment of tension. And I did really like the final fight between Cunningham and Rob Roy, and I thought that was shot really well. Again, I thought there was genuine tension there because, as I say, we've established how good Cunningham is at sword fighting. But yeah, it feels a wee bit too twee, a wee bit too tartan and shortbread. And as I say, this film's a very long film. It's like 2.5 hours, but I just didn't ever get a feeling of who Rob Roy was and genuinely what he was fighting for. You know, he's a hugely sort of like mythical Scottish outlaw. And as you say, we're presented almost with a sort of romance drama instead. So yeah. And when the threat is there of violence, like the English sort of the redcoats sort of appearing on the ships and all that to burn down his croft, those scenes only last a few minutes. There's not big battle scenes or anything like that. There is a couple of shootouts, and again it's sort of like mist and swirling, and you're not really seeing much of what's going on. So I felt like there was maybe an opportunity there to take a different angle to this. And again, I don't know if that's Michael Keaton-Jones' decision or a studio's decision. It just doesn't work for me though.
Yeah, I had real problems with the scale of it, in that it seemed to be very small scale. Like you say, when you mentioned there about them coming ashore in order to get to the croft. One, why are they coming by boat when there's perfectly good land?
That really did cross my mind as well. I was like, talk about a dramatic entrance.
Yeah. So yeah, coming on shore and all this, that was just nonsense, basically. But it was maybe only about like 20 guys that was doing all this, and all of the sort of fight scenes never seemed to be they were building it up as this historical sort of epic almost, and it never felt that way. It always felt really sort of small scale. Even when they had the big clan gathering, there wasn't that many. It was maybe about 25 or 30 people there, and it didn't seem to have that sort of scale to it, and that really hurt it because it was kind of going for that. But then again, the story wasn't geared around an uprising of like the nation. Yes, it was a sort of smaller uprising and everything, but it didn't kind of work that way for me, which I was a wee bit disappointed in that, I must admit, because I thought it was going to be slightly bigger than that. Now, given that, let's talk about the ending. Let's talk about the final battle, or fight, I should say, in this case. And this is obviously a slight spoiler for a film that is 30 years old, I would say. If you haven't seen it, why haven't you seen it by now? But given the fact that up until last week, neither myself nor Mary had seen the film, so slight spoilers ahead for the end of the film. Mary, what were your thoughts on the final fight?
So I actually think the tension in this works. As I say, Rob Roy is obviously there. He's dueling for the missing £1,000 and obviously for Mary's honour, because at this point he knows that she has been sexually assaulted by Cunningham. Tim Roth appears in like aqua silk with silver thread through it and feathers, as you do for a duel. And I genuinely think it is like, it's well shot, it's thrilling, the tension is there because Liam Neeson looks bloody knackered, whereas Tim Roth is very light in his feet and very sprightly, and you do get treated to a couple of swirling sort of camera angles there where you're seeing like nicks and cuts. And actually, I think that's probably the most tense the film, or the most tension the film has to offer, because you genuinely don't know who's going to win this or who's going to get. I mean, you do, because obviously history tells you who wins it. But I mean, like within the context of these scenes. So I actually think that works really, really well. But then it's sort of undercut, I suppose, by the sort of the actual ending of the film, where it's like the shot of him coming home through the glens and Mary runs towards him and he sort of emerges with his hair blowing in the breeze, which again pulls it back to this romantic drama. Whereas if I had seen more of him and Cunningham sort of toe to toe, I probably would have enjoyed it a bit more, because I do think the fight choreography is really good as well. And that it's very credible, like it looks very believable. So yeah, I really enjoyed that fight scene. But 5 minutes out of 2.5 hours is not bad.
Yeah, it was a particularly well done scene. Like I say, the choreography for it was like a dance scene, the way that Cunningham was jumping about. And the fact that even though he was this foppish character who affected a lisp and everything in order to fit in with society, he knew that this was a serious fight, so he took off his wig.
Yes.
So, he wasn't going to be messing about in the same way that he messed about in the previous fight that he had with the Scotsman, where he was just basically playing with him. But here he knew it was something slightly more serious, so therefore he was focused on the task. And I thought it was choreographed very, very well.
Yeah.
For a fight that only went on for a couple of minutes, I did think it was a wee bit long though, because there's only so many times you can see him getting like slightly cut.
Yeah.
And all this, and you're thinking, I think he would have put a blade right through him in the first minute or so.
It's just a close up of Liam's muscles. That's what it is. A bleeding, sweaty man.
Yes, yeah, and obviously it does come to a conclusion where you're supposed to stand up and cheer and go, Scotland! Yes.
Yeah, but that's what this film is missing, I think. Like, it doesn't have that effect. And what's weird is, like, it does set up this sort of class clash between obviously the normal crofters and the cattle ranchers and obviously the noble, like, landed gentry. It does set up this divide. But not in a way that actually like imbues this sense of like, way at the end of it. Like, it just, I don't know, just it doesn't materialize that feeling of like patriotism or just like a pride to be Scottish, or that feeling of getting one over on, our dear brothers across the border. Like, it just doesn't imbue you with that in the way that obviously Braveheart does. Nobody's going to feel like nobody's going to be quoting Rob Roy, before a Scotland football game. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah. It doesn't have that same quotability as some other films. There's only one that I picked up on, which was when Rob Roy becomes aware of a fact, and he says, "If I had known earlier, you would have been dead sooner," which I thought was, okay, as threats go. There was a couple of wee elements which I found quite strange, which mainly had to do with bad language. There was a couple of uses of the word quim in here, which I thought, okie dokie. And there was a couple of uses of the word shag as well. That came up more than once in the conversations, like when Rob Roy was approached by a guy who was wanting to avenge one of the cattle rustlers' deaths. And he says, "Well, were you kin?" And he said, "No, I shagged his sister."
Yep.
Which is close enough. You're going, okie dokie.
It is a kind of weirdly vulgar film. Like, one of the quotes I have written down, and I'm so sorry for saying this out loud, it's basically when we first meet Tim Roth's Cunningham, and he says, "It's been years since I buggered a boy, and in fairness, I thought it was a girl upon point of entry."
Yeah.
That's your introduction to that character. And then we have this fucking awful scene where Cunningham has basically been having sex with one of the ladies' maids or something like that. And Brian Cox's character sexually assaults her and then uses his fingers basically to wake Cunningham up and says, like, "Oh, there's nothing better than the smell of quim in the morning." So it's not quite Apocalypse Now, but it's basically roughly that quote. And it is It's so out of place. Like, why is this dialogue here? Why? Other than to show that these people are just disgusting, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of it, but I never even thought about the link with Apocalypse Now. It's brilliant.
That's all I could think of. I was like, this is a terrible use of that line.
Oh man, that's fantastic. Yes, and it feels completely out of place. It really does. There's no real reason for it, I don't think. Yeah. Oh man, that's good. Okay, right. So, is there kind of anything else that I have missed here? I would like to say in the credits for the film, there are thanks for Jock Stein, the football manager.
Why?
And I don't know. I think he just died. I think this is. I think he died in 1995 when they were just qualifying for the World Cup. I think it was the '96 World Cup they were qualifying for. And Alexander McKendrick gets a thanks as well. He's a film director, Scottish film director. He did a lot of the Ealing films, and he's one of these guys who's been about for years and years. You know, he was very sort of famous in Scottish film terms and things like that. So it was interesting to see why, you know, how they were in. Did you think that was a wee bit strange giving Jock Stein a wee heads up?
I mean, obviously, as I say, you know, lifelong Celtic fan, so I just didn't get the connect. And of course, I'm not even thinking of the actual Scottish thing. I was just thinking, why are you thanking like a former Celtic manager for this? It was just, there was that. And then, as I say, I sent that picture to you and Simmy where straight after it was like, because you watch this, you might want to watch Angus McFadden's Robert the Bruce. And I was like, no, I fucking don't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was strange. I didn't realise that was a Scottish director as well that they were thanking. Did they give any reason was he an influence on Michael Caton-Jones or just?
I'm assuming he must have been an influence on him. He obviously, like I said, did a lot of Ealing comedies, but he also did The Sweet Smell of Success as well, which was a fantastic movie. But, you know, I mean, this is like, he was sort of prevalent in the 1940s, 1950s. He died, I suppose he died in 1993 as well. So that was just before the film would have started
being made,
shooting, because it would have been shot in 1994, summer of 94, and getting released in 95. Now, Tim Robbins was obviously, like I said, the only one that was up for awards here. He won a BAFTA for his portrayal.
Did he?
Yeah, he did. I think it was justified.
Oh, absolutely. Like, he is I mean, this is a bad film, right? And I'm not going to be telling anyone to rush out and watch it, but he is brilliant in this film. So even if you want to check out little clips of him on YouTube, basically, as I say, that swagger that man has is unbelievable. And his characterization of basically just a complete and utter bastard is very, very successful here, because you really, really feel like deep dislike for him. And so, yeah, do you know what? Out of a bad situation, sometimes there's like a little nugget of gold, and that's definitely Tim Roth in this film.
All right, so as you've just noted there, you wouldn't really recommend this then?
No, I'm sorry. It's 2.5 hours long, and you don't actually learn anything about Rob Roy. And unless you actively enjoy bad Scottish accents, if that's maybe like your thing, I would not recommend this film, I'm afraid.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much the same for me. I don't think it's a great film at all. I think there are so many problems with it. I do think that it's got its high rating and its enduring appeal for some people because, like you say, of Americans having this idealized version of Scotland that they like to think on, you know, the old country and all this sort of stuff. It kind of fits in with all that, you know, the tap and bagpipes.
It fits in with the sort of Outlander type of vibe.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the last 20-25 minutes of this film do an awful lot of heavy lifting for the film. People tend to remember the endings of films more than, so they're quite happy to forgive the previous 2 hours of the last 30 minutes is good. Now, the last 30 minutes there's a bit of action in it with Rob Roy jumping off a bridge and trying to escape and all this sort of stuff. And then you have the final fight scene, which is, again, very low-key, it's only between two people. It's not like armies charging into each other and things like that, and a big battle ensues, cast of thousands, all that stuff. It's not like that at all. And a lot of people kind of resonate with that, say, oh, that's really good. It works really, really well. You're in a comparison, you can see that with the Thunderbolts film, or as it's now called, the New Avengers. The last act of that is very low key as well. There's not a big like aliens versus robots battle or anything in it. It's very kind of small scale and everything. And again, that works. But again, does that forgive the previous film? We may talk about that another time. But yes, I can't recommend the film based on all the shite that's gone before it. I can't forgive it for the last 5 minutes. We have now covered the first half of our film, Double Bill. On the second half, we are covering the also 1995 film, Braveheart. Pause here to insert the clip from film. That's what I tend to do, so yeah.
In a land of timeless beauty, William Wallace was a man of peace.
I want to stay here with you.
And I with you.
You say you want to stay out of the troubles?
If I can live in peace, I will.
But when they threatened his world,
Edward Longshanks is the most ruthless king ever to sit on the throne of England.
Scotland. My land.
and the woman he loved,
I want a home and shelter. It's all for nothing if you don't have freedom.
he was driven to war.
Go back to England and tell them there that Scotland's daughters and her sons are yours no more.
When I first suggested this film, I'd watched Braveheart maybe about 7-8 years ago. I saw it when it came out of the cinema at the time, and I watched it about 7 or 8 years ago because my son had picked up a copy of it on Blu-ray because he quite fancied watching it, and watched it together, and it was quite an interesting watch for me. What I did forget before I suggested doing it this time is the film is 2 hours and 57 fucking minutes long. It is it is not a short film. It doesn't take a minute to explain something where 10 minutes will do. So that's an interesting one. So as I say, Braveheart from 1995, directed and starring Mr. Mel Gibson himself in the title role as Brave. No. as William Wallace. I'm sorry, I just couldn't.
That was brilliant.
That. It is another American-led historical. A lot of people forget that Mel Gibson is actually American. I know he was raised in Australia.
Oh, I said Australian earlier, actually.
No,
sorry.
a lot of people think of him, including myself, think of him as Australian because of his accent. But he was actually born in America. That's why he's an ambassador to Hollywood at present. So
yes, I saw that.
You can't have a foreigner doing that. Yes. So Gibson stars as the Scottish warrior William Wallace, who, due to personal circumstances in that his wife was murdered by the English bastards, he seeks revenge first against the people who did it, and then what ensues is a popular uprising against the English in general for the way that they have treated the Scots over centuries, not just years. This is going back centuries. The problem with Scotland is it is not a united country. There are people who have their own agendas, there are factions, there are clans, same sort of nobility that you have in the Rob Roy film, which is obviously set at a slightly different time, like about 500 years after this, but a lot of the problems are still exactly the same. So there are nice wee similarities there. This film was massive. There's no other way of putting it. This was a bloody massive film. It's one of the most quoted films of the 90s. Everybody knows if you say freedom, they know, you know, everybody around you knows what that means and where that came from. Now, whether it's in the right sort of context in terms of the film, it doesn't actually really matter. But it's just one of these films that if it was released now, it would become a meme right away.
Oh, 100%. I mean, do you know what's kind of embarrassing about this? See, watching this along for this pod, I was actually saying the lines at the same time. That's how, because it's not that, I mean, I've maybe seen it about 6 or 7 times, but it's so iconic, some of the delivery and some of the, also the speeches and stuff like that, and some of the wee one-liners that I find really funny. But yeah, no, I find myself actually saying the lines along with it.
So, given its history, and I know for a fact that you have seen this, what were your expectations this time in going into this?
I know that there's so much historically inaccurate about it, and I know that Mel Gibson is fully cancelled, but there's something about the minute this starts and you've got the rolling hills and that beautiful James Horner score and the mist, you are just drawn into this immediately. And what I think this film gets so right is the sense of, like, the way that Wallace was able to draw people to him and the way that people wanted to fight with him, for Scotland. Like, it does a really good job of establishing a great character who is obviously a Scottish sort of legend, I suppose you would use the word, so sort of like obviously a very famous Scottish person from history. Like, I feel like it really does a good job of getting the characterization right and getting that sense that you are on the right side of history. Like, so you'll forget the fact that the French princess was only actually 3 years old at the time, or you'll forget the fact that the Battle of Stirling Bridge does not take place on a bridge, or you'll forget the fact that Mel Gibson sounds like he comes from Glasgow and not, you know, Stirling or any of that kind of area. You absolutely forgive it these like otherwise criminal mistakes, because it draws you into that person, into that point in history. And yeah, it does. It makes you want to paint your face blue and give the Sons of Scotland speech. It does.
Yeah, given the fact that I had just watched Rob Roy and went into this film, the difference between the two films was massive.
Yeah.
Just like you say, the way that the film opened with the music, with the cinematography, the scenery, and you're thinking, this is so much bigger. It sets it up as being a far bigger scale film, and you can tell there's been more money put into this film as well for a start. So I was quite astounded by the differences between the two films. Obviously, that we are doing we are reviewing both of them separately, but there's obviously a certain amount of crossover and contrast and compare, because as with Hollywood's want, when they do one film of a style, you usually have another one. So you, especially in terms of disaster movies and things like that, films set around a theme, you get, you know, like for instance, if there's a meteor going to be hitting Earth, there's going to be at least 2 meteors hitting Earth in different films. You know, that's kind of the way of it. It was interesting to see how they both compared with each other, and it only took about 2 minutes to say, well, there has been a winner declared by knockout here.
Yes.
There's no comparison with it at all. So obviously, when was the first time you saw Braveheart? Can you remember?
Interestingly, I think it was 1995. I was 6 when this came out. My mum and dad had, like, it was so long that it came on 2 videos, so it was a chunky VHS. But I remember only being able to see clips of that in the house, because I was obviously quite young. And then I think the first time I watched an edited version of it was in high school at history. And obviously hilariously, they would leave in like battle scenes, but the scene where they all lift up their kilts to show their arses, that was a hard no in a Catholic high school. So I saw an edited version of it then. So I think it was after that I went home and actually watched the full thing on the 2 videos. So it probably was a good number of years ago, but it's something that if it's on and I'm channel hopping, I'll sit and watch it. I don't care what part of the film it's at. But actually, it was nice to sit down and watch this with a purpose this time as well. Because as I say, I have seen it about 6 or 7 times, but just when it first came out, obviously I was a wee bit too young to actually go and witness it in all its glory in the cinema.
Yeah, as I said, I saw it at the cinema. This is an interesting one in that Rob Roy came out in late April 1995, which was only maybe about a month after it came out in the States. But Braveheart came out about 6 weeks after Rob Roy in America and basically wiped the floor with it. But it didn't come out here until September time And by that point, there was a whole campaign around it for sort of Oscar consideration, like months ahead of it. It was the epic of the year and all that. And, you know,
Was there not a premiere in Edinburgh? I seem to remember pictures of Mel Gibson in a kilt.
I think there was, yes. They did the full, they lent very heavily into the Scottishness of it. So, yes. One thing I do remember, which would seem bizarre now, but when you came out of the screening of Braveheart, there were people from the SNP outside the screening handing out leaflets urging people to join the fight against the English.
Oh my God.
Join the SNP.
Do you know what, though? First of all, that makes complete sense. But do you remember the Kevin Bridges joke? And he was like, if they just played Braveheart the night before the independence referendum, the SNP would have swept. And they absolutely would have. You feel so patriotic watching this film. Like, that's mad. I can't believe they were handing out leaflets.
Yeah, I remember it vividly because this is obviously, 95, they were so far away from being any.
Oh, they were a tiny wee party.
They were a minority party even in Scotland. So, yeah, they were obviously had some very clever people around at the time, kind of pushing their agenda and stuff. But yes, I do remember that. Let's get into the meat of the film itself. The story in this one is probably just as fictitious as the story of Roy, but for some reason, it comes across so much better, and you tend to give it a bit. Well, I tended to give it a bit more leeway. I wasn't as critical of it, and I think with William Wallace, bizarrely, you know more about Wallace than you do about Rob Roy, I think.
Yeah, all I was going to say is I think because you do have, like, for example, the Wallace Monument, and you can go and see the Wallace sword and things like that. For some reason, despite the fact that, as you say, he was several hundred years prior to Rob Roy, for some reason we do actually have more information about him, which I think is, obviously this takes liberties, like, let's not kid ourselves, but it is sort of relatively faithful to the source material that it has, and then the rest of it obviously is just pure fantasy.
Yes, yeah. So what did you think of the way that the story kind of unfolded? Obviously, the film starts with Wallace as a boy and witnessing the death of the clan leaders. What did you think about that as an opening to the film? Do you think it was effective?
That scares the shite out of me because, as I say, I was only young when I first saw this, and like that scene where he runs through those bodies because they've been betrayed by the bloody English is so sad and so scary. And do you know what, though? It's one of those things where, as a young boy, he sees this, and you just think this is obviously setting up for his desire to avenge and to sort of have his country sort of consolidated under one. And you absolutely see that through the fact that he witnesses this as such a young boy. And then you've got the kind of friendship between him and Hamish, which obviously spills over into adulthood as well. And then at his dad's funeral, young Murren gives him a thistle. And that's usually when I start to cry about the right then. And then it just keeps going for the rest of the 2 and 3/4 hour runtime. But I think it's a very effective opening because you understand that from the offset, from childhood, Wallace has actually been rooted in major historical events within Scotland in terms of it trying to forge its own way in the world, forge its own leadership, the betrayals at the hands of Patrick Magoon's Longshanks, which I'm sure we'll come on to. So yeah, I think it does a great job, and obviously he's taken under the wing of his uncle Argyll, Brian Cox, booked and busy in 1995.
Absolutely,
this time with a sort of foggy eye and a penchant for foreign languages, but it just shapes Wallace because he's not an everyday sort of crofter. Like, he's obviously very well educated. He can speak Latin, he can speak French, he can read, he can write, which I imagine must have been completely unheard of for people of his sort of class at the time. So yeah, you get a sense of this is a man who is different, not just because of what he's experienced, but because of how he's been taught to think. And obviously, as we get into the battle scenes, this becomes very important.
Yes. I like the inclusion of the uncle because that sets up the fact that he is taught how to use his head before using a blade, because that's what he wants to do. He wants to learn how to use a sword. And his uncle Argyll says to him, once you learn how to use your mind, you can use that. And that kind of sets up basically the whole film. It's a case of him trying to use his head before he actually engages in battle in any way, whether it's a battle of words or whether it's actually with swords as well. So I liked the fact that they didn't just make him out to be this Scots warrior. They made him out to be somebody who actually thought and everything as well. And obviously that is based on the fact that he was taken away and he was given something of an education, which was very radical at the time because most people just worked. And when he comes back as an adult and he's like want to reset his craft, he's not interested in the secret meetings that they're having because he wants no part of it. He just wants to sort of live his life. You can tell that he's seen things and he's been places. And he understands how the world works, and he's not particularly interested in getting involved in that because he sees the folly of it more than anything else. So he keeps himself to himself. He wants to get back with Maren. He wants to have a family, that kind of thing, but he doesn't want to get involved, and he's kind of forced back into it. And that almost like switches something in his brain, and he goes full out. It's almost like it was described at one point as being like a berserker, like the warriors when they go into sort of berserker mode. And it's just the total. I think that would usually involve some sort of drugs, didn't it? With the berserkers, they would
some sort of like plant or something.
Put them into some sort of trance. I don't think, obviously, that doesn't happen here, but it's like his rage at the injustice done to him personally rather than done to everyone around him. That's what kind of fuels him, and that's what kind of sets him forward from there. So I really thought that was such an effective start to the film. And it got you completely engaged. And like, obviously, if you're sitting there looking at the runtime, you're thinking what's going on. But then the first 30 minutes of it just kind of rolls by quite nicely.
Absolutely,
That whole scene where he receives the thistle, apparently the thinking behind that was, obviously, he was standing there on his own and none of the other adults was coming to comfort him. And the whole point behind that is if they come over and comfort him, then in a way they're taking responsibility for him. So therefore they would take him in, and none of them want to do that because they've all got families to feed.
An extra mouth to feed,
Exactly. So they didn't want to do that. So it set up that scene quite nicely with this giving the thistle, and then obviously that led on to him giving it back to her later on, kind of idea. So yes, I really did like that. So we have Mel Gibson in the dual role here. We have him as the main actor, and we also have him as the director. Now we'll look at the actor side first. What did you think of him in this?
I realised that Mel Gibson is cancelled, and I'm probably going to get cancelled for saying this, but I'm sorry. He is absolutely fucking gorgeous in this film. He is strapping. He is like, he's got the ghillie shirt. Well, it's more like a ghillie vest. He's got the stole. He's got the long hair. He's got the kilt on. He's like properly muscly and sweaty and dirty. And he's so charismatic. Like, you understand why men actually flock to Wallace and why men want to be by his side and are willing to put their lives on the line, because he is so learned and so erudite that actually he articulates himself so very well to crowds. He can go toe-to-toe verbally with people and physically. I think he does a really good job of capturing the myth of the man, because let's be honest, although we do know enough about Wallace that we're able to sort of make a film about him, we don't actually know the ins and outs of what he was like. But Mel Gibson lends him a sort of charm and a physicality that I think is really credible. Now, obviously, the accent is wrong geographically, because I believe Mel Gibson stayed in Govan to learn how to do a sort of like West Central Scotland accent. It's obviously wrong. However, what I will say is it's consistent. So he has almost no trouble with the vowel sounds, which I think is really difficult for a Scottish accent. Interestingly, he usually trips over the letter R, and you can hear it more when he's shouting. But I think he does a really consistent accent. And yeah, I think he does he's got great chemistry with Catherine McCormick, who plays Murren, and he's got an easy sort of charm and friendship with like Tommy Flanagan's character, James Cosmo, like Sean McGinley, like all those sort of Scottish actors. Like, he's just so credible as a man people would choose to follow. And I'll probably stop saying nice things about Mel Gibson now, because that's probably enough for somebody who's definitely cancelled.
No, you've got to remember here, this is 1995. Mel Gibson's
Pre-cancellation, yeah.
He's at the height of his career, and this is a case of separating the artist from the art, I think.
Yeah.
Because you can't talk about this film in any sort of terms without talking about just how good Mel Gibson is here.
Yeah.
In terms of his performance. Like you say, it's his natural screen presence and charisma that initially carries this film, because it needed somebody like that. Now, no disrespect to Liam Neeson. I'm sure he listens to the pod and hopefully he won't stop subscribing. But
every week.
He does not have the same screen presence
right.
in this type of role.
Yeah.
It's night and day. Now, Liam Neeson does have a certain amount of screen presence. He has shown that time and time again. But this is Mel Gibson coming off of the back of the likes of Lethal Weapon 2. Things like that. So it's really, he's right up there. He's basically, he wasn't any bigger than this. It was only sort of downhill from here on in for a number of reasons, mostly to do with his own personal life, but his film career obviously it was kind of mixed, and he was getting a little bit older and everything. But
I think that I don't think he wanted to play Wallace, because he said, so Wallace died when he was 35, Mel Gibson is nearly 40. However, I think he is the perfect fit for the role. And I don't know, is that his actual eye colour? Because they are so blue in this. It is almost like verging into the fantastical of how charismatic and alluring this man was. But yeah, no, I did read that he didn't want to play the role because he felt too old. Because obviously, when Wallace started his campaigns, he was maybe a decade younger than, obviously died at 35, so maybe 25 or whatever, but he carries this off unbelievably well. And I think that also the sort of, yes, there is that love story with him and Catherine McCormick's Murren, but to me, I just think it's a really beautiful element of the film, not in the sort of they're constantly pumping way that Rob Roy seems to go down. There's a genuine sweeping cinematic romance going on here, and obviously James Horner's score definitely adds to that. But to me, their wedding scene and everything, and when they're kind of playful with each other the next morning, that is just one of the most beautiful moments in cinema. And I'm obviously biased because, yes, this is a very sort of it's a film that does make me sort of proud to be Scottish and whatever. But I think the chemistry is there for all the right reasons. And yeah, I think he owns this film in every sense of the word. He is the director and he is the star. And my God, is he the star? He's incredible in it.
Yeah. For anybody playing Moviescramble bingo, I'd just like to remind you that we have already had Pump, Quim and Shag. So that's Pump, Quim and Shag. So remember to mark those off in your card.
And Sammy's not even here.
Oh dear. One of the main problems with Rob Roy was obviously we had a problem with the accents, but obviously some of the supporting cast was not as good. Here it's a completely different story, in my opinion. I think this is a stacked cast. There are some very, very good performances in this, and they're actually given a decent amount of stuff to do and a decent amount of stuff to say as well. Would you agree, disagree? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Let's take the obvious one, Patrick McGowan's Longshanks. From the first minute you meet him, it's the trouble with Scotland is it's full of Scots. And immediately you're just I hate this guy. I hate him. And so you're just wrapped into his villainy straight away. And he's so, and even there's later on in battle scenes and he's use up the Irish, their deaths don't count. And you're just right, fuck you. That's all the Celtic brethren you've managed to insult, because he talks about Welsh people as well. So he's such a good villain, but also he's going through his own sort of problems in the sense that he thinks his son is too effeminate. And therefore not fit to rule. He's having to do a wee bit of wheeling and dealing over in France. For example, bringing Princess Isabel over to marry his son because he needs, an heir, and he also needs the French on side to defeat the Scots. So he's sort of having all these problems from all angles, and yet you don't give a fuck. You want bad things to happen to him. He's a horrible, horrible man. And so from the outset, you have this clear hero in the classical sense and villain in the mustache twirling sense, but not in a way that sort of, it's not pantomime. He's just so good at being a complete shit. So I really, Patrick McGowan obviously is fabulous in this. And as I say, I mean, I think Catherine McCormack is, for her small amount of screen time, I think is really, really powerful. Like, I love the scene. Well, I don't love it. Obviously, it's a very sad scene, but I think it's so well done when she is facing her death and you get the gorgeous close-up of her eyes that are so full of tears, and she's scanning through the trees because she assumes William is going to come back for her. And that, oh, I'm usually crying by that point as well. Yeah, that, I mean, it's so good. And then you've got like a beautiful like cast of like proper Scots actually to back this up. You've got the likes of Peter Mullen, obviously Angus McFadden is Robert the Bruce. You've got James Cosmo. I've mentioned Sean McGinley as well. So there are lots of Scots there as well. I also really love the Irish character, is it Stephen, and you know, he's got lots of one-liners as well. Like, I love the scene where they're all holding their shields over it, and he's like, the good Lord is pretty sure he can get me out of this, but he says that you're fucked. And I love that line, and I always quote it back every time we watch. So, interestingly, despite the fact that there is a wee bit of accent salad going on here, like, I do feel like the supporting cast is really colourful and vibrant and draws you into the story. I think everyone is doing their bit here, as it were, to keep you engaged in this.
Yeah, there are enough people of good standing in it that it doesn't feel as obvious when there are a few dodgy accents in there. You're more carried along by the story more than anything else, I think, with this one, and that is because of the talent that's actually on screen as well. And with the extended runtime of it, it gives time for characters to be developed a little bit more, so you get an understanding of why. Like, for instance, he has this lieutenant, the Brendan Gleeson's character. Yeah, he's his right-hand man, if you like, and you understand why they're like that, because there's a scene of them when they're young boys, and then when they re-engage, and you can tell why he's always by his side, why he's always backing him up, and that's all the way there, all the way through the film. The Catherine McCormack performance as well was really good. I really liked that performance, like you mentioned, where she meets her death and she meets it with silence, and that's something that is played back again towards the end of the film, when we will spoil the end of the film in a short while, but that is actually played out again, the silence of not actually saying anything, not screaming, not crying, all that kind of thing, whereas the death of all the English directly after that is quite noisy.
Oh, they're all begging for mercy.
Yeah.
There is a guy who, like, I love that scene where I think it's Hamish has the axe and there's an English soldier running towards him, and he's just like, nope, and he actually says that and turns around and tries to run, but obviously gets an axe in the back for his efforts. So yeah, there's a lot of piggly wiggly squeals going on, which you say Mudden just doesn't give in to that. She's very dignified in her death. Yeah,
I definitely liked it. I preferred this Brian Cox performance as well, not because of the type of character he played. Not, I mean, he was a shit in the other film. He was really horrible in Rob Roy, but I felt he had a greater impact in this film by the way he conducted himself. He just had a bit more stature in the film, and a bit it less to do, and it far less screen time, because a lot of the counselling that he did was obviously as Wallace was growing up. So that wasn't included in it. There could probably be a whole other film about, you know, young Wallace. I'm sure probably somebody's pitched.
I was going to say somebody's probably got a notepad and pen at the ready going, that's it. That's the screenplay I'm going to write, young Wallace.
Yeah, he was in France. He was in Rome. Oh, the adventures we could have. So yes, I definitely think it benefited from all these people. Now, you briefly mentioned there Brendan Gleeson hitting somebody with a big axe. That was really the first sort of action scene in the film where they are avenging Marin's death. How did you think that went? That was reasonably small scale, but it was quite important in the development of the film because it changed Wallace's outlook. So what did you think about that?
Yeah, so as I say, I don't usually like the whole sort of sexual assault as a precursor for revenge type of trope here. But in this case, it literally changed the course of history. So Murren's death, because she would not obviously give in to the gross prima nocte situation, spurs Wallace into action. And as you say, it's quite small scale, but it's actually really chaotic. So you've got Wallace sort of like jumping over, I don't know what you would call it, like lodgings where English soldiers were sort of keeping guard. And what's interesting is within that scene is you see how immediately everybody else who knows Wallace, primarily Hamish and his sort of clan and extended family immediately jump to Wallace's defence, no questions asked. If Wallace wants to kill these English soldiers because of what they've done to Murren, then fuck yeah, boys, we're on board as well. It's basically the sort of atmosphere that carries through. And of course, it's chaotic. There's like, swords being thrown, axes being thrown, hand-to-hand combat, and you hear all that gorgeous, like, fist against metal, sword into skin, like you hear everything. But as you say, there's maybe only about 20 English soldiers, so it's not massive, but it just sets the course for the rest of the film, and that these men are going to be by Wallace's side, and basically the end goal is killing the English.
Yes, yeah, pretty much, yeah. I liked the introduction to that scene because you had Wallace on horseback and you would just catch glimpses of him. They were obviously looking out for him.
It was vaguely slow-mo, wasn't it? It was like,
It was very like a spaghetti western. I thought the way that it kind of leads into one of the big sort of fight scenes there, and you would catch glimpses of him, and then you would see some of the English soldiers looking about and all this sort of thing. And it was only just him. You didn't see any of the other Scots there. They were very much obviously still hidden and everything. So it was almost as if he was coming into a trap. He knew he was coming into a trap, but how is he going to deal with it? And then obviously just
because there's that moment where he does the lovely, like, put his hands out, like, I'm just riding here, I'm totally innocent, and then you get that gorgeous slow-mo, the sword comes out through the back of his, like, ghillie shirt or whatever, and he just goes on the rampage. So I really like that touch, as well as the fact that he was obviously faking that he was surrendering, but actually he was here to, as he says in the film, he's away to pick a fight.
I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I love that line. So good.
It's so funny. Yep. So obviously we move on from there into sort of bigger, larger scale action scenes, big battlefield jobbies. And like you say, with the historical Battle of Stirling Bridge, they obviously didn't shoot that in Scotland. The majority of this film, I must say, was shot in Ireland because they offered better tax incentives, and they offered 1,600 extras from the Army Reserves to be used for the battle scenes, which obviously swayed the production to moving the majority over there. So the Battle of Stirling Bridge is not done anywhere near a bridge at all, because the bridge is obviously very important to it, because you could only get 2 horses across at a time, so therefore it was a bit of a bottleneck. And they were surrounded by water, I think, on all sides after they got over that. So they did away with the bridge because it was inconvenient.
Yes, as it was for the English, I believe one person quipped as well, because apparently they did ask him about why he didn't do that, and he said, the bridge got in the way, and the guy said that's what the English found.
So that battle and Battle of Falkirk, they are the sort of, there's I think there maybe, those are the sort of main battles. And it has the same intensity, but the scale is far bigger, and it takes its time in showing these battles. Apparently, the original cut of this film was 4 hours long, and a lot of that
4 hours. Do you know that?
A lot of that was battles. So it was an interesting way that they managed to cut it. I think they had to cut it down as well because of some of the brutality actually in the battle scenes as well. It was a lot more gory than what we actually saw on screen. Now, what we saw on screen was fairly gory, I would think. But what did you think of the scale and the way that these battles were actually put together for the screen?
Yeah, so I think it's just about an hour in that we actually get the Battle of Stirling Bridge. And I think that's when you get your first taste, obviously, of Wallace's tactics and his strategic ability as well. It's obviously the first time in the famous blue face paint, and that's where you get your Sons of Scotland speech from as well, which is incredibly powerful, whether you feel patriotic or not. Like, you can't listen to that and not feel moved by the sentiment. I think the tension in the battles is all the battles, actually, not just this one. But I think it's built up really beautifully because there's, first of all, you've got the score, and you've got like a sort of like pulsating drum beat that goes with it as well. And you've also got pipers to accompany the fighters as well, as tends to be the case. But then you've got these sort of short, sharp edits where it's cutting, like, usually along somebody's eyes in particular. And that's sort of mixed with the slow motion of horses in charge and little to no dialogue. So, for example, in the Battle of Stirling Bridge, all you've really got is Wallace shouting, "Hold," and with the close-ups of the faces. So I think the scale of the battles is really impressive. The choreography, the fight choreography. I mean, how you actually wangle 1,800 people to do exactly what they should be doing at the exact moment in time, just in case there's a close-up. I don't know how you manage that, but I think they're so impressive. They're big, they're bloody, but again, they also tell us something about Wallace. As I say, we understand that he's a tactical man, that he knows how to outsmart his opponents, and that he understands the sort of art of war, if you want to call it that, in a way that the English obviously just can't compete with. But I also particularly love the scene where Longshanks ropes in the Irish and they charge over, and of course they end up making friends with the Scots and fighting alongside the Scots. So I really like that as well. But yeah, no, I think they're like a genuinely stand out, not just within the film, but within cinema in general, in terms of how skillful they are put together. They're really effective battle scenes.
They put together an edit of, I think, particularly the first fight, and then realised it was too smooth in the transitions between certain elements of it. So they would cut off like maybe 1 or 2 frames towards the end of a small particular sequence, so that it would have a jarring effect where you were cutting between one and another.
Works.
And it works really well. And like you say, in these scenes, there's no dialogue. There's just a hell of a lot of noise going on, grunting and not even shouting.
Horses' hooves and
yeah. And apparently they used quite a lot of mechanical horses in this film, because obviously they couldn't put stakes into real horses. And a lot of the time you can't notice the difference. It's only if you're looking really closely that you kind of notice.
I don't think you can tell.
Behave, but you can't really know. I wouldn't think so. It's done very well, and apparently it cost them a lot of money, and they were really heavy and everything as well. But yes, I like the idea of it wasn't just a case of 2 groups of people coming together and then just like a big stramash, if you like, in the middle. It was thought
a good
out.
Scottish word.
It was, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased with you said that. It was tactically thought out, and you could tell that there was brains on both sides, especially Longshanks, because apparently he was a military genius as well. He was involved in crusades and things like that, so he learned a lot of military tactics from that, and that's how partly he was able to defeat Wallace on the battlefield. That and the fact that obviously Wallace was betrayed by the leaders, which we shall get on to in a moment. I know. I didn't like him.
I just honestly, every time, and do you know, finally Chris came to watch this with me. Like I think he ended up watching like the last maybe 2 hours of it, and he said as well, like he was a wee bit like Charlie Bottom, like every time Robert the Bruce takes that metal like helmet or whatever off, and the betrayal that you see in Wallace's eyes, like he's physically wounded from battle, but emotionally wounded from somebody who he thought was an ally. And Chris always says that scene in particular, Mel Gibson's acting as Wallace is like for him one of the most powerful moments of the film, because it's the betrayal that it's palpable.
Yeah, and there are no words in that scene. Really, they just look at each other for like the longest time. And like I say, it's the way that you can see the hurt in his face, because everything that he's worked for to this point is just completely blown away by someone who should and said, obviously, he was on his side. Now, Angus.
Oh God, I'm so glad we're talking about this.
What did you think of Angus as the Bruce?
Oh, you know, it's funny because having obviously watched this several times before and not knowing that he genuinely believes he is the saviour of Scotland, totally different approach to that film. You just think that he is, again, he's a character who, not dissimilar to Longshanks' son, but is very much in the grip of his father's control. You know, his father's trying to orchestrate for the Balios to be in charge of Scotland, and he is a different type of Scotsman to Wallace. You know, we see that Robert the Bruce is dressed in furs and has gold chains around his neck and is a lot more well-spoken, so he's got a different accent, but in this case it's appropriate because he would have been a lot more well-spoken than Wallace and the rest of the sort of normal sort of working classes, if you want to call him that. So he's an interesting character in the sense that he is held up as a Scottish hero if you're taught about Scottish history in schools and things like that. But in this film, he is seen as like a betrayer and, you know, somebody who is ruinous to the fortunes of Scotland as a country, and obviously tries to redeem himself at the end. But yeah, it doesn't paint him in a particularly flattering light.
No, it
I
does
would
not.
say he's definitely not there to be the successor to Wallace, in the sense that they are two people fighting for the same thing. Like, he is definitely set up as maybe the fall guy, I don't know if you would call it that, but he's definitely set up as somebody who's not as courageous and somebody who's a bit more self-serving, I would say.
Obviously, we will touch on spoilers for this film. So towards the end of the film, Wallace is betrayed twice, I would say. He's betrayed on the battlefield.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, when Alan Armstrong and they pull their forces away,
Yeah, they're there, but they pull them away, and the Bruce is nowhere to be seen. He is supposed to be standing head and shoulders with Wallace. And as you said, he turns up when he is actually instructed to kill Wallace, to stop him from reaching the king, because he chases after him away from the battlefield. And then the second time, it's almost biblical, the way that
I was just thinking that, yeah.
He is betrayed because Wallace comes to speak to him in secret. And it's actually a trap arranged by Bruce's right-hand man. Now, that's all very well, yes, Bruce didn't know about it, and Bruce actually jumps in to try and help him. But he gets pulled away by the right-hand man, saying he's not to be touched, he's not to be touched. But then at the end of the film, the right-hand man is still there with Bruce on the field, and you're thinking, what the fuck is he actually doing here? How could you trust somebody ever again if they betrayed you like that? And you're thinking, well, that's the sign of a weak man. And that's kind of it. It adds to the fact that throughout the film, the nobles have been seen as being particularly weak in terms of leadership. They're there through birthright rather than anything else. And it's the same for Bruce as well. And the fact that his father, who's played by Ian Bannon, I believe, in this film, is disfigured. He looks as if he's got leprosy or something like that. So there's something wrong. So the impression I got from that is there's something wrong in the bloodline there as well.
Right, okay, yeah. I never even thought about that, but you're so right. And that's why he's sort of forcing his son to try and take this position of power.
Yeah, but he knows himself that obviously he's got this disease, and obviously his blood and somehow is tainted, his body's tainted, so therefore his lineage is tainted. So he's pushing his son in a certain way to be in charge and be ruthless, basically, which obviously does happen to a certain extent, but it does not paint Robert the Bruce in a very good light at all in this film. And a lot of people criticised the film for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that would have... Yeah, I think that would have been quite controversial, because if you study Scottish history at school, or, if you just are Scottish, I would say that most people talk about Bruce and Wallace on a similar sort of level in terms of sort of this historical status and how critical they were for, bringing about Scottish independence, whereas that is not how this film plays things out at all. Poor Angus.
But he's obviously... Everything you read about Braveheart, at the end of pretty much every article, it says, and there was a legacy sequel to Braveheart, a legacy of sorts. And like you say, when you were watching Rob Roy, it says you may also like Robert the Bruce.
No, I would not.
Yes, quite.
But Angus McFadden obviously felt the need to, for whatever reason, like maybe 20 years later, really felt the need to redeem that character. And I feel like he's been festering over this role for so long that he obviously made that film, which obviously has been quite critically panned. But he obviously felt so strongly about the way that maybe Bruce was portrayed. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I think he was of the impression that the story wasn't complete in terms of the Bruce. It didn't do any favours that it took the best part of about 20 years. Or in fact nearly 25 years for the follow-up to come out. And if you think an age gap of 5 years difference between Mel Gibson at 38, whereas Wallace died when he was 35, Robert the Bruce wasn't that much older, and he was played by Angus McFadden when he was in his 50s, so it wasn't particularly good at all. Now,
that'll be one to miss.
Yeah, I think, not recommended, I think. The film as I say, was a massive, massive success. Won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Writing, and Best Cinematography, which is actually quite an interesting one because obviously you had this nice glossy Rob Roy-ish film where they're in the hills and all this sort of stuff. Now you get a wee bit of that in Braveheart.
You do.
What I got more from Braveheart was the fact that Scotland is dirty.
Yeah.
It's manky. It's not like everywhere in the Rob Roy film. It was clean. People looked clean.
Yeah, the dirt on their faces looked really artificial, whereas here it's like grimy. And also, like, for example, the night where William takes mudding out for the first time, it is pissing sideways, and he says, "This is good Scottish weather," which obviously is the classic joke. But yeah, there's a real grime to this film. You know, they sort of polished Wallace up occasionally, and he's got a clean face. But I would say for the vast majority of people here, you get that sense of that just sort of endless swamp that would have been the sort of lowlands or sort of central, like Stirling, you know, living in a croft, working on the land, using your hands, all that sort of thing. You definitely get a sense there's a lot more grime here.
Yeah, it was definitely came across that way, and I think that was part of the job of the cinematography to make it look not real, because it is a fantasy. It's not a real story. It's mostly made up. There are, like you say, with the French princess, which I couldn't go over when
I know
she was 3, and I thought, okay, that's
a bit young even for the English royal family.
That's a thing, yeah. But yeah,
what I will say though as well is that Randall Wallace, who is the writer of this, seemingly decided to research Scottish history because he's one of those Americans that thinks that he is related to William Wallace because of his surname. I'm just going to point this out right now to any of our dear listeners across the pond. There are no descendants of William Wallace. I don't know if you saw the end of the film, but he definitely dies, and there's no kids because Princess Isabel was not pregnant with his child because, as we've mentioned, she was 3. Wallace is a really common Scottish surname, so I'm really sorry to anyone who thinks they're related to William Wallace, but you are most definitely not.
I think we can take that shred. Yeah,
but that is seemingly why the writer wanted to write this story, because obviously he thought there was a familial connection there, his roots, as it were.
Yeah, I suppose so. It does kind of it makes for good copy more than anything else, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yes, it was kind of the big winner of the year at the Oscars the following year.
Not surprising. Like, I do think that the Oscars love a big sweeping epic, and this is a big sweeping epic. What I'm actually more surprised at is, one, that there was 2 Scottish films out in one year. I'm saying Scottish loosely for Rob Roy. I just mean it was set in Scotland. But I actually think that Scottish history in particular is so rich and is so interesting that I'm surprised there haven't been more attempts to bring different periods of it to life on the big screen. It is a very cinematic history if you go back and read various parts of it. And the Final Girls group that I joined, which is, shout out to them, Final Girls Glasgow, a horror meetup group where we discuss horror films. But actually there's a lot of Scottish history that lends itself really well to the horror genre as well, with obviously like the supernatural, the Kelpies, the witch trials. So I'm really shocked that there's not been more of Scotland on screen.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pleased that this absolutely swept the board, because I think it deserves to, and it's such an important part of Scottish history that it's nice to see it sort of. I think as Scots, you don't hear your own voice that often in film and TV, and actually see it do so well is really quite incredible, actually.
Okay, let's talk the ending then.
Sure.
What did you think of, obviously, spoilers, he dies at the end. He is hung, drawn, and quartered by the magistrates because he will not confess his sins against the English king. And if he does confess his sins, then it's a quick death. If he doesn't, it's a long death. So,
I know, it's not really much of an option, is it? It's like you're still going to die either way. Before we go on to that, though, what I will say is that I like the use of dream sequences in this film, because I really like the one actually that predicts Morney's death. And you kind of get the sense that because a lot of William's dream sequences revolve around corpses, if I'm being honest, that actually he's sort of foreseeing his own death as it comes eventually. I mean, you get the lovely line when he's in the prison and Sophie Marceau is going to beg him to, you know, renounce his like traitorism, or whatever you want to call it, treachery. Yeah. And he does the whole, you know, every man dies, but not everyone really lives. So I really like that. But then you've got that beautiful little moment before his execution where you can actually hear the crowd sort of braying, and he's praying and he says, I'm so afraid, please give me the strength to die well. And I think that's a really, again, what this film gets so right is that insight into the character. And I think that's a really beautiful moment, because actually up until this point, we've seen a man who's so sure of himself and so confident and so unafraid. And actually here he is saying that he is, you know, he's scared. So I think that you feel very protective of him, and especially as he moves out into the crowds and he's sort of spat on and abused and they're all throwing like cabbages and tomatoes and stuff at him. And then obviously, I don't know who the actor's name is, but he looks and sounds like he's out of a Hammer horror. The guy who's actually conducting the death, as it were, and he's like, you know, just cry out for mercy. He's whispering in his ear. But then what I think is interesting is that the crowd starts to turn, because they are telling the executioners, like, mercy, like, stop doing this, because obviously we get to see the full hanging, drawing, and quartering in its glory. But obviously it gives way to another very cinematic moment. Murren's cloth wedding gift falls out of his hand and he gets to shout freedom with one last breath. So again, really beautiful. I see it mostly through tears every time that I watch it. But yeah, I think it's the cinematic death that this sort of like legend deserves, if you know what I mean. Everything's building to this point, so of course it can't be subtle and subdued. It has to go that sort of extra, not hyperbolic, but it is sort of leaning into the legend. Definitely, it's very, very over the top. As I say, the guy that's the executioner looks like he stepped out a Hammer, but it somehow works, despite the fact that it is a wee bit cheesy.
Yeah,
just a wee bit.
You could imagine that guy being a stand-in for Christopher Lee in some
exactly.
Films,
yeah.
Christopher's running late today. Let's get the
jump in.
He's very much like that. I did like that whole scene where obviously he wasn't. It mirrors Murren's death as well, in that he doesn't speak out, he doesn't cry.
Yeah, he's
and
very
the whole
stoic.
point of the baying crowd is they're there for a spectacle, and they're not getting that. They've come to realise that they're not getting that spectacle, and it's just wrong, because this guy is now suffering, and he's suffering in silence, and it's for what he believes. But yeah, I like the whole idea of the fact that he's thinking in terms of the legend. He's thinking in terms of what his legacy is going to be now. If he goes out there and he is a coward and he screams and he cries, that's the word they'll get back. Whereas before, you had scenes where, you know, it was saying that William Wallace is 7'5".
Yeah,
you know, he killed 50 men with a sweep of his sword and all that.
Fly out his arse. I love it.
all that. So there's the whole myth stuff, and that's what actually.
Yeah, he's conscious of his own legend in his time, which is fascinating as well, because obviously, you know, this is back in the 1200s and 1300s, so word of mouth and storytelling was so powerful, and his story was obviously growing arms and legs as it was getting passed on from one village to the next. So he's aware of his legend within his own time, and as you say, he uses that to give himself a sort of legendary death by remaining stoic and quiet, and
So in his death, his legend spreads to the four corners of the kingdom in the same way that his arms and legs spread to the four corners of the kingdom as well.
Very, very generous of Longshanks to share the gift of Wallace with all four corners.
Yes. Head in a spike and everything else is to the four winds. I thought, it was quite poetic. So yes, I did like the last sequence. It was a fitting finale to the film, and it wasn't dying in battle or anything. Obviously there was the very last scene was the iconic throwing the sword I'm assuming that was the Battle of Bannockburn, although it didn't actually. Did it say that was the Battle of Bannockburn? I don't know if it did.
Yeah, I think it does.
Does it? Okay,
or is it not,
right.
Is it not Culloden, actually? Is that not the last battle?
Is it? Right, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Bruce obviously leads the troops out.
Yeah. So yes, I thought it was a very nice ending to the film. And again, the last 30 minutes of this film, where the big it punched quite high above its weight, but it was it had less to do to keep people interested and actually to sort of nail the finale than the Rob Roy film did, because that was such a diverse
so busy
ending.
that it
And
needs.
yeah. It didn't earn it, whereas this one did earn it in terms of the whole overall spectacle and the runtime. Now, in terms of runtime, do you think it was too long? Or do you think it was just right?
No, listen, you're telling me there's a 4-hour cut. Like, show me the 4-hour cut. I feel like because this film is so person driven, so we are driven by Wallace throughout this entire film, and therefore it's really easy to follow. But the secondary characters obviously are fleshed out. The battle scenes come at just the right time to keep you interested as well. But the pacing in this is markedly better than Rob Roy, which is, as I've said, felt just far too bitty. This flew in by comparison. Like, I genuinely couldn't believe it was over when, and again, because you've watched it so often, you kind of know the beats that you're sort of looking out for. I genuinely couldn't believe this was coming to an end when it did. It uses its pace like really, really well.
Okay, good stuff. So I think it's a bit of a redundant question, but would you recommend this film?
Yes, as I say, this is one of these films that I feel like even if you're not Scottish, it's going to imbue you with a strong sense of like courage and patriotism and all the things that it wants you to feel that Wallace has. And as I say, as a Scot and someone who doesn't, we've got great actors up and coming, like, or well established, like James McAvoy and Jack Lowden, and yet we very rarely get to hear them use their own accents. So actually to have a screen full of it and done well is really, really nice. So yes, I would absolutely recommend this film, if only just to listen to the score again, which is one of the most phenomenal parts of it. So yeah.
Yes, it was one of those scores that was under consideration for a previous conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I thought, no, I won't talk about it, because obviously we're going to talk about the film afterwards anyway, and it would kind of intrude in that, and I'd end up repeating myself more than I normally do. Myself, yes, I would recommend this film. I think it has aged very gracefully. It's still as powerful as it is now, and because it's a historical epic, and because of the way that it was shot with a lot of practical effects and extended battle scenes, it works very well, because it's not reliant on any sort of technology that ages very, very quickly these days. So yes, I think it really stands up. And yeah, there are obviously problems in saying that you like a Mel Gibson film, but I think we can be forgiven in this case because it was 30 years ago. Put it this way, over the next couple of months, we're going to talk about some very problematic people indeed.
I know, I was going to say 1995 seems like right for the picking, although I will say that Sidney replied to my tweet saying that he thinks that Braveheart really stands up, etc., etc. Great film from the director of Flight Risk, which absolutely ruined me. I could not stop laughing, because obviously we had the joke about the Flight Risk trailer, which said like from the director of Apocalypto, but would not put his name up there.
Yeah. Oh dear, oh dear. So yes, that is our discussion for today. We shall obviously be back quite soon with the next installment in our marathon, so please listen out for that. That will be coming in the next couple of weeks. If you have opinions about the films that we have talked about today, or any of our previous marathon entries, which are up on the Moviescramble feed at various locations, please let us know. You can, as I say, you can find us pretty much everywhere that issues podcasts these days. We are there. Just do a quick search for Moviescramble, and the Scottish goodness will flow into your ears.
And obviously, I assume we're going to be in contention for a Golden Globe.
Well, yeah. Best foreign language podcast, I think. If you do want to get in touch with us, obviously, please drop us a line on these social channels. We do monitor them regularly, so we will get back to you. Or you can send us an email at podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. But until the next time, it's cheerio from me.
Can't even bring myself to say it. And okay, the new from me.
Oh, it's bra.